Welcome to Lifeway's Ministry Success webinar series. Lifeway exists to honor God and serve churches by designing trustworthy experiences that fuel ministry. For over 130 years, we've created resources to help church leaders carry out the greatest mission, to make disciples of Jesus Christ. We invite you to visit lifeway.com and discover all the ways we can help to empower you and your ministry with thoughtful research and trustworthy resources. Today's webinar is brought to you by Lifeway's Ministry Success Team. We believe that successful ministry requires teamwork, and we want to be on your team, walking alongside you every step of the way. This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a link via email to rewatch at your convenience. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey everyone, my name's Devin, Maddox, publisher at B&H Publishing Group. Recently at the Southern Baptist Convention, I had the opportunity to interview two of our authors, Shane and Shelly, about their new book, Researching Generation Alpha. Every effective church reaches the next generation. It's not something that we delegate just to the student ministry or kids ministry. Every healthy and growing church prioritizes reaching the next generation for Christ. Hope you'll enjoy this conversation. I'm excited to be here with you guys today. It's so fun to be able to talk books with authors. And it's such a privilege at B&H to get to partner with you guys. Today we're talking about a book that you've co-authored called Reaching Generation Alpha, a ministry guide for discipling the church beyond the screen. And I want to start just by talking about the idea of researching generations. Why are generations important to understand from a ministry perspective?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Devin, we want to say thank you for publishing the book. We were really excited about that. We're also excited about I feel like we're being proactive too, where not that it's a competition with the secular space, but, sometimes secular space may even beat the church space in certain topics. And so obviously there's some great articles out, podcasts out already, but there hasn't been a book make a big splash in Gen Alpha. And so thank you all for publishing it and partnering with us, because I feel like we're being super proactive on this conversation. So yeah, why study generations? In fact, I've gotten that question a lot. I'm sure Dr. Melia is as well. But I really take it from the approach of a missionary. If God called you to go be a missionary in China, what you're going to do is you're going to study the people. You're going to get there, you're going to get immersed, you're going to study the people, the language, the culture, the felt needs, the pain points. Why? Ultimately, because you become more effective that way of pointing them to the truth who is Jesus Christ. And so when we look at Gen Alpha to go, okay, that's a mission field. That's a people group. So let's get immersed with this people group to go, let's understand their heartbeats. Let's understand their worldviews. Let's understand their pain points, their needs, so we can be better equipped to point them to truth in Jesus Christ. Yep.
Absolutely, and I think we tend to want to do what worked for us. So I was a teenager in the 1980s, and when I think about youth ministry, I think about what it was for me, and maybe I even expect it to be that way now. And the truth of the matter is the world is so different. And so helping older generations, I think, understand sort of the landscape. What are those things that our kids are dealing with, so that we can create environments, ministry environments, that are going to help them flourish.
Yeah, well, every healthy church has a healthy next-gen ministry.
Absolutely.
If you want to find a growing church, you're going to find nurseries that are full, vibrant student ministries.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so help us understand, when we say the next generation, who is Gen Alpha, and how do we identify them?
Yeah.
So Generation Alpha is the ones right after Gen Z. And so right now in our ministries, they're 2 years old to 16 years old. So we have them both in preschool, children's, and youth ministry. And so that's really why I think we decided to partner, is that this is kind of a unique time when we can talk about a generation that is in both ministries. And so, they're 2 to 16, and they've been in children's ministry for a while. And so I think in some ways, too, it's important for us to help youth ministry, student ministry, know what they're getting. Who is it that we're sending up, and how have they been impacted by the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Devin, I love that you pointed that out, because one of the things that we point out in the book, Reaching Generation Alpha, is we did a poll, and I did it through my social media, And we just asked this question: at what age did you surrender to Jesus as Lord and Savior of your life? And we had just shy of 2,700 people answer that poll, which is a pretty good polling segment. What we found is 77%. I want to say that again so it's very clear when people hear it. 77% of all Christians surrender to Jesus as Lord and Savior of their life before the age of 18. Now, I believe in the sovereignty of God, that God can save whom he wants, when he wants. But practically speaking, if we don't reach them by the time they turn 18, we lose a whole generation. So when you think, even ministry-wise, when we look at our nurseries and our children's ministries and our youth ministries, please, we should never look at those as glorified babysitting, where we're keeping them, active so mom and dad can go to big church. That's what we used to call that. Mom and dad go to big church. No, these are the front lines of our evangelical efforts, So our next gen leaders are primarily disciple makers, evangelists, missionaries, to reach this people group. And now is the time. We can't wait.
Yeah, I think sociology is such a gift to the church, and I know that there's all kinds of politics to sociology. Social sciences in general sometimes can be antagonistic to faith. But I find it very helpful to identify societal patterns. I think it's important to understand people in ministry, and societies of people take on characteristics. And so some of the books that I've enjoyed the most that contain generational research, maybe it's about the boomers, or there was a book we published years ago about the millennials that was really helpful, that was based on some research conducted by Lifeway Research about that generation. I find that it's helpful in the same way that it's helpful to get to know somebody personally, to get to know these generations, help us to understand not just the generations themselves, but to answer the question culturally, what is going on? And I think, there's two reasons why I'm very interested in this book. One of them we discussed off microphone. We're both raising Generation Alpha in our home. I've got 3 boys in my home that are Gen Alpha. And so I have a personal investment in this as I try to understand their world. But the other thing is this concept that you talk about in the book, which is called a phone-based life. This is such an important concept to understand for ministry right now. What is a phone-based life?
Oh, well, I think in terms of even discipleship, Devin, because used to, whenever I was a youth pastor for a long time, we would kind of do diagnostics of our ministry, and they go, okay, how many of our students are being discipled? And whatever that number is, how do we raise that? So is it 25%? Is it 50%? And I think now with phones, tablets, Gen Alpha has been on those things their whole life, screens. In fact, there's a new term, instead of teenagers, it's screenagers, because they've been on screens their whole life. So when you go, okay, how many of our students, whether it's children, teenagers, whatever, how many are being discipled? The answer is 100%. 100% of them are being discipled. So the question is not, are they being discipled? They are. The question is, what or who is discipling them? And so when you put a tablet in their hand, or you're putting a phone in their hand, you're saying, okay, the world now has an opportunity to disciple my child, to disciple them in cultural views on sexuality, really all kind of views. And we can't just be silent on that. We have to step in. And so I would say we got to talk about even hard things, because I would much rather young people be discipled by truth instead of TikTok. Much rather them be discipled by the gospel instead of, the Grammys. So we have to step into that, knowing they have these phones really in their hands. That means they have access to all this information. Some of it good, some of it is going to disciple them in a way we don't want. So I would say we need to start being the major influence in our kids' lives again, step into that, and don't let those phones disciple a generation, because if we don't, the world is more than happy to,
Well, and the thing that struck me about a phone-based life as I'm reading this is not limited to Gen Alpha. Now, this is a major focus of the research,
right?
Because it's unique to their childhood and their development.
Their
personal development.
Absolutely.
But I think you'd probably say as well that this is also their parents and their grandparents' generation.
Oh, absolutely.
Too.
I think we all have issues with phones, and I would even contrast a phone-based life against what we really want for kids, and that's a play-based life, where they're learning how to relate to people in the world, in the wild. You use that word a lot. But there's so many important things that kids learn through play. interacting with kids, making up their own games, monitoring their own baseball games out in the neighborhood. That, Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about just that phone-based life. And we want our kids to grow up learning how to relate to each other in real life. And so we have to model that. Definitely all generations are addicted. There is at least a collective moment and movement. With Jonathan Haidt, he's really kind of gotten parents on board with getting phones out of schools. And so, that was a collective problem that he proposed a collective solution. And so if the secular world can look at phones and say, hey, we don't want our kids on phones at school because we think it will enhance their learning, enhance their relationships, enhance all those things that they need to do, then we sometimes talk about, why doesn't the church do that too? Why do we go to church? And I do the same thing. I'm a little bit of an introvert. And so when I'm nervous or anxious, I might just start picking up my phone to act like I have something to do, right? And it sort of becomes a barrier to relationships. And so, parents need help understanding that in the same way they don't need phones at school, let's don't have them at church so that kids will actually interact, that we will actually interact with each other. One of the phrases that I really like in the book by Jonathan Haidt is he talks about...
Hold on one second. I want to jump in and just say, Jonathan Haidt, if you don't know Jonathan Haidt, he wrote a great book called The Anxious Generation. He's a sociologist and researcher, not a believer.
Not a believer, atheist.
But he does have very good insights that align with a Christian worldview. And I interrupted you, so I want you to get back to what you were going to say. But
well, he quotes, I think it's Sherry Turkle, that says we are forever elsewhere. That we are never really present because we're always checking things. We're always worried about what's going on. And I would say that anxiety is really based on being forever elsewhere.
Ooh, that's good.
Because if I'm not present, then I'm thinking or worrying about what's happening in the future that probably isn't going to happen, but I'm worrying about it. Or I'm, have shame from the past or whatever it might be. And so, in counseling, I'm a counselor too. That's one of the things with anxiety is you got to be present, get grounded, touch some grass, look outside and be where you are. And so I think there's so much to the phones and so much that it really robs, I would say kids for sure. And I would love to see us continue to push that movement into the church even.
Well, and it's true that men in our churches need a play-based life. That sounds like a childish thing, but it's actually something that grown-ups need for their own. You're talking about counseling for their own mental health. For example, I want to read this quote that I took from this book, but it's a Jonathan Haidt quote. Since you mentioned him, he said, "There's a God-shaped hole in every human heart." Now, bear in mind, I'm going to interrupt myself and say, not a believer.
Not a believer.
Yeah. There's a God-shaped hole in every human heart, or at least many people feel a yearning for meaning, connection, and spiritual elevation. A phone-based life often fills that hole with trivial and degrading content. The ancients advise us to be more deliberate in choosing what we expose ourselves to. Now, I find with the sociologists, they're always saying things like, we really need ancient wisdom, or like the world religions can really help us. But we as believers would say, oh, brother, there's so much more. Talk to me a little bit, Shane, about how to fill that God-shaped hole in our hearts in case there's anybody watching that's not clear what we're talking about.
It's actually in the name, God-shaped hole. Only the Lord can fill that. And I think that even goes back to some of, whereas anxiety, the hopelessness, the joylessness is we all feel that, right? We're born with that because of a sin nature, that God-shaped hole in our soul. And we try to fill it with other things. And the world says, well, if you accomplish these things, then you'll feel complete, So it's like, okay, well, if I can have that phone, then I'll feel complete. Or if I could just get invited to sit at the cool table at lunch, I'd feel complete. If I could just make the A team, or the varsity team, I'd feel complete. If that guy or girl I like would like me back, they would complete me. And it's never enough, because here's what's true is that you'll always feel like something's missing in your life as long as someone is missing, and it's Jesus Christ himself. Like he is the hope. That's why we did a whole chapter in the book, Reaching Generation Alpha, of Gen Alpha and the gospel. Like it's still the hope. You go throughout history and we love generational studies, obviously. That's why we wrote this book. But you can think of, okay, baby boomers, then you think of Gen X, then you think of millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the beta generation coming up after. We did a chapter on that. You look through the Bible from Genesis through the maps at the back. That's what my old pastor used to say. He goes, I believe the Bible is the word of God from Genesis through the maps at the back. You know what you're not going to find in there is those terms: baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. What you're going to find is people made in the image of God that desperately need the gospel of Jesus Christ and need to be discipled and need community around them. And so I would say, even through all of this, what we want to do is stick to the basics, because I think sometimes we overthink it so much we forget the basics. And the same gospel that has been reaching young people for a long time still works today, and that's the ultimate fulfillment of that God-shaped hole.
I wrote down in the margins of my book that people are addicted, distracted, and dopamine sick.
That's exactly right.
And you described really, really well some of the things that Gen Alpha, through your research, you've discerned that they're trying to fill this God-shaped hole with all the things that you listed. But we could take each one of those things and say, instead of I tried to fill this God-shaped hole with this team, we could say for the dad in the same family, I tried to fill my membership to my country club.
100%.
Or I tried to fill this with my career or my, whatever my goals are financially. And we're all broken in similar ways. And what I love about this book, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the person that would say, this book is for youth ministers, and that's it. So maybe as a pastor, I can skip this one. I would say, brother, no. You can't skip this one. Not because this is not directly relevant to Gen Alpha people that you're ministering to in your church, but there's a thing about American culture where we revolve around youth culture. If you want to be effective in your community at reaching people, you've got to understand this stuff to be effective.
Absolutely.
Do you believe that?
Absolutely. And that's what I love. Dr. Melia said this multiple times too, is like, we wrote this book generically enough, like you said, for pastors, youth pastors, children's ministers, parents, grandparents, teachers, coaches, basically anybody influencing the next generation. And one of the things that Dr. Melia does a lot is she's like, even with parents, in line is exactly what you're talking about, Devin, is like, typically anxious parents will raise anxious kids. Screen addicted parents will raise screen addicted kids. Distracted parents are going to raise distracted kids. Parents who are really making idols out of things will raise kids. You know what I mean? That's why we go back to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:1, imitate me as I imitate the Lord. And so I would say, even for parents to go, okay, if we don't want our kids screen addicted, then we can't either. Because how many times do we go, it's easy to go, okay, young people are screen addicted. I use the term I go, screenagers. But how many times do we go to restaurants and mom and dad are just sitting there scrolling on their phone?
It's for work though, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's right. Grandparents, Nina and Jeepar sitting there scrolling on their phones.
With the volume fully on.
Fully on, and the speaker phone, the speaker part fully on, And so I think a lot of times we go, okay, how do we influence the next generation? It's got to be out of the overflow of our own worship of Jesus, our own discipline. Our kids don't need us to be perfect parents. They don't need us to be perfect ministers. They just need us to follow the one who is perfect and to go, okay, let's set the example. Because I think, again, it's easy to go, oh, yeah, those teenagers, or those kiddos, but are we setting the example?
Well, you did research in the book on the topic of pornography. And, of course, parents will say, well, I don't want pornography for my children because of the damage that it does, especially as you're developing and maturing. But to Shane's point that he just made, people that are struggling with this in their own lives are not going to be very good helpers. And so maybe what's some hope that the statistics are rough, but where is the hope for the next generation on this issue?
On pornography specifically? Well, first of all, I think we've got to realize that it's the creepy man that you warned your kids about in the old days to watch out for is actually in their bedroom. It's on their phone,
that's good.
Right? So he's already getting through to them. And so one of the survey questions that we asked was, how aware do you think parents are of certain issues? And so the number one thing that parents are not aware of was AI, and then the other one was inappropriate content shared on social media. So what parents have to realize is that kids are accessing pornography on their phones, and they're creating it, right? They're sharing inappropriate content. I know a good family whose daughter been to all the youth camps and, without thinking, snapped a picture of herself, sent it to her boyfriend. And you know what happened after that? It just crushed her and devastated her. She just didn't think through all that. And she was been raised in a great Christian home. And so parents need to be aware of that. And that changes, I think, as well. We see more women, more girls utilizing pornography too. The stats are like equal, whereas it used to be like 89% of boys, 39% of girls. Now it's like right even. So gone are the days when we think it's just a boy problem. So it's also a girl problem. And then they're using it to learn. That they're looking at pornography to learn and explore their identity, which I think is what leads to some of all this confusion. So what is the hope in all that? I mean, it doesn't sound very hopeful because there's a phone that our kids can get anything, anytime, anywhere, and they don't even have to go look for it. It comes looking for them. And so I think that's where those hard conversations have to start when they're really young, to say, hey, you're going to come across this, not if, but when you come across this. And one of the stats that we found too is that kids don't tell their parents about it. And I always ask conferences, why do you think they don't tell them about it? And they come to the conclusion, well, they don't want to get their phone taken away, right? So we have to be really careful that when our kids see it, and if they tell us, that we don't respond so strongly and take away something, then they won't tell us the next time. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And really, the phone is a portal to the world for this generation.
It is.
And so when you say you no longer have access to the predators on the internet, you're also saying you don't have access to your friends on the volleyball team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really
It's
gets
hard.
tangled up. And if a parent has to choose between, well, I can't take this away because it means that she's disconnected from her friends, well, we're going to have to challenge some of the assumptions underneath what it means to be relational and to develop in relationships and community, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. And, we did, again, another whole chapter on this in the book. One of the statistics that actually Dr. Melia found in her research that we put in the book that really just blew me away was that the majority of teenagers, when they hit 13, become teenagers, have already engaged in like online pornography in some form or fashion. And so I think a lot of times we think, oh, we'll have those conversations when they get older. Now, I know we need to have age-appropriate conversations, but the point I'm making is like, even if we wait till they're 13 to start talking about purity, holiness, pornography, you're waiting too late, when now the majority, when they hit 13, have already engaged with it somehow,
That's good. You hit purity. That's a buzzword in millennial culture because of the sexual purity movements that they were raised in student ministry. I work for an organization called Lifeway. In Lifeway, we were part of the sexual purity movement that championed true love ways. And in this age of deconstruction, purity culture, as it's been coined, has been put on trial. But sexual purity is not something that Lifeway came up with.
Right.
Sexual purity is a biblical concept, and there has been a lot of Christian culture and resources around that. And here we are with this generation who has said, man, there's a lot that I'd like to dump off from my upbringing, but now with a phone-based life in their own home, what the research is saying is that there's way worse destruction than what we were facing with these other sexual purity movements, but we've thrown out all of the methods from the last generation.
Absolutely. Spot on, Devin. I say this all the time. It's like, okay, is there areas with, for lack of a better term, purity culture, holiness, sexual purity, saving yourself from marriage? Was there areas that we got super legalistic, or anytime sex came up in our church, it seemed negative? Sure. But I still want to make it very clear. Holiness is good. Purity is good. Sexual purity is good. So don't throw that out, And I think one of the things that we even touch on this in the book is like, sex is a biblical concept. And so I know sometimes maybe in certain situations, anytime sex would come up in Christian conversations, it would be like, okay, sex is gross, vile, disgusting, so save it for the one you love. That was so confusing, right?
Right.
And then what would happen is my wife and I, Casey, we would like minister and counsel to couples that were now married and they were still struggling, going, well, this still feels shameful. This
Right.
still feels dirty and all that. Okay, we're not talking about that. What I'm saying is like, we can teach these concepts still in the vein of purity, still in the vein of holiness. That's good. You're right. That's biblical, you know? So, you know, we even hit on this in the book a little bit. Is like when you look at Genesis chapter 1, God creates man, creates woman, and then the first command he gives them is to be fruitful, multiply.
Yeah, God is the designer of this.
He is the designer of this. This is his idea. It's not like he created Adam and Eve, turned around, got a drink of water, turned back around going, what are y'all doing?
Yeah,
Get off of
that's
each
right.
other. You know what I mean? And so this is a God design. Now, here's the thing. If God is the designer, God is the creator, he also gets to be definer. Now, we don't get to redefine what God has already defined. That's what our culture is trying to do. So sex is a wonderful, beautiful thing in the design of God between one man, one woman in a covenant relationship of marriage for eternity. And I think we teach that to students when we have this conversation. One thing that I've said, you know, many times here recently is that my wife and I, for our own kids, we want to embrace the awkward conversations. We want to embrace the weird conversations. Like, bring us your questions. We'll respond age appropriately. But if they have questions and they don't feel like they can go to their parents, or they don't feel like they can go to, you know, their children's minister, youth leader, they'll go find those answers somewhere else, and we're not going to like where they find them. So we like bring them to us. Because I even think of my own upbringing. I shared this story earlier. Like the birds and bees talk that I received was, I was about 14. I came home from basketball practice one day. I walk into my room and there was this weird book on my bed. And it was like talking about the birds and bees, but it was like using animals as an example. Now, my parents never asked me if I read it. They never brought it up again. Like, it never was brought up. I just went in there and there was that book on the bed. And so we wanted to lean in differently to go, bring us your awkward conversations, bring us your awkward questions. We embrace that because we found kids do want to talk about these things. It's usually us adults and parents who are nervous to talk about
Yeah,
them.
which you never would have guessed when you were a kid that your
No.
parents could feel that way.
Yeah.
You know, I am mindful that the millennials, and I'm the oldest millennial or the youngest Gen Xer. I don't know where really I belong generationally, but I do know that my peers kind of, what is normal among us is we are the deconstruction folks.
Yeah.
And we tend to tear down and deconstruct those things that were given to us that were supposed to strengthen us.
Yep.
And so things like true love waits,
Yep.
we've said, okay, not that. But we're not building at a great rate. One of the things
right.
that I think God is doing amongst the next generation is building up new ways to minister to this generation. I think it's one of the reasons why everybody should read this book is to really understand what's going on, because I think God is calling the church now to be builders. And one of the things you and I have talked about privately is, okay, really the only way that we get to criticize things is if they're really actually very effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so God raised up a generation of people before us that said, we're going to have a movement around sexual purity.
Yep.
But there was also things like we're gonna do See You at the Pole, if you're old enough to remember that one, where we are going to make prayer a national movement around the next generation. It occurs to me because of something that you said is, why is it the case that professors at NYU are leading the culture to get parents to rally around communities to say, let's not live a phone-based life at school?
Mm-hmm.
Why is the church not in on this conversation more?
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it would be a great movement, particularly at camps and retreats. I know we fight sometimes with parents who want to send phones with their kids for safety. And so I do think, I think belonging is such a pain point for all of us. And all of us are struggling with that, with this phone-based life. We're all seeking attention. We're all seeking likes and approval because we're not getting it in real life. And so helping kids, you know, put down the phone. Anytime I've done that with my kids or around a group of kids, you know, they kind of protest at first, but then afterwards they realize, man, that was fun. And if you think about kids' sports, that's the only time when kids don't have their phones, right?
And they survive.
And they survive and they enjoy it. And that's one of the most important things in their life. And by the way, those teams become like family, you know, and so they're getting their community and their belonging from something outside of the church, and why are we not trying to cultivate that inside the church, which I think has a lot of implications for children's ministry, for youth ministry, getting people relating face to face, consistent people, not just doing things on the screen all the time, but actually sitting around and talking about topics rather than just monologue at kids. There's so many things. I'm sure with student ministry, you've got a million things that you could change.
I think one thing that is exciting is I feel like churches are starting to understand this a little more because I know like some college ministries, and I know that's Gen Z, but youth ministries as well going, okay, we're going back to physical Bibles. So even encouraging students, bring your physical Bible. CSB.
That's right.
My favorite. That's what I preach with. Bring your CSB Bible. So, I even know our college age daughter, she's 20 in a fast growing college ministry. She's a small group leader there. And I know that's, again, Gen Z, but I feel like this can trickle down, is their college ministry has raised the bar, and college students are responding like crazy to go, okay, on the screens on Wednesday night during our worship gathering, I'll put my main points up for you, but no longer verses. You bring a physical Bible. We're going to help you learn how to find chapter and verse in your Bible. We're going to have physical Bibles for you in case you don't have one. We're going to put one in your hand. And so I think even small things like that to go, okay, it's not phones open. I'm on my, I'm looking at my scripture on my phone. I'm typing in all my notes on my phone. I mean, even that, they're typing in notes on their phone. It's like, okay, physical Bible, physical journal. Let's get off the screen for a little bit and let's really engage in the moment too. Because I think just like if we're not careful, just like we can miss the real world around us with real people, I think it happens at church sometimes too, to where God's moving, the Spirit's moving, God's with us, God's doing incredible things, and we're still kind of distracted by even being on our phone, even if we're in the Bible on our phone or writing things on our phone, because it's so easy for those notifications and texts to pop up. So even at church, we're forever elsewhere.
Yeah, we really are.
Yeah,
that's good. I think that one interesting thing that I've observed in some different churches in my area is one church in particular does a digital or social media fast between this date and Easter. And you know who really loves that the most? Gen Alpha.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're the ones that are most excited to try it. And once they do it, they're like, man, I think this might be a better way to live.
Yeah.
Cool.
We've started doing device-free meals at our house with our own kids, whether that's at our house or going out to eat. And as Shelly mentioned earlier, at first they were like, are you serious? Like, are we going to get through this meal without our tablets and our phone and our device? And now, after we've been doing this for about 6 months, they went from like groaning about it to now they're the monitors of it. They're like,
Dad,
it's like,
get off your phone.
Dad, get off your phone. Mom, like, what are you like? They'll call out the grandparents. Nina and G-Paul, get off your phone. We're having a device-free meal. So now they're the ones calling it out, because I think, like you said, Devin, they've embraced that now to go, oh man, we're actually getting to know each other even more than we have ever before. Like I'm not too long ago, it just stood out to us. It was like, one of our kids asked Casey and I how we met. And I'm like, it's amazing that they didn't know that already.
That's right. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, this book, Reaching Generation Alpha, a ministry guide for discipling the church beyond the screen, has been so important to me as a reader. And I think it's going to be so important to this generation, not just of next gen pastors and ministers, but also to pastors of every stripe. You guys have done so many interviews and podcasts. What's maybe one question that you wish somebody would ask you about this book and about your research?
I love the last chapter about Gen Beta. I wish that people would start now asking, how are we going to help Gen Z parents? Right? Because as they become parents, they've had some unique life experiences. They have some unique filters that they view the world. And I think that as we think about them parenting betas, we're going to have a whole different conversation, because things that will be important to them are going to be way different than what was important to boomers or Gen Xers. And so I just love thinking about even further into the future and thinking specifically about Gen Z. I have Gen Z kids. And so I see and hear how they experience the world. And I'm like, they're going to be different parents. And we're going to have to really pay attention to that. And why not start now? They're waiting longer to get married. Why not start now discipling them so that they're ready to parent? And so I kind of wish people would ask about that last chapter. But
yeah, Probably the question I wish people would ask me more is, why in the world did Dr. Melia let you put your name on that book? Because she could have totally done this by herself. Like, incredible, amazing, the research she adds and stuff. No, I think for me, it's just the ongoing conversation of like, okay, here's how we reach Gen Alpha, here's how we disciple them. But even more questions of like going, here's how we mobilize them to be the church right now. That's a drum I've been beating for 20 years and hopefully will continue to until Jesus comes back, is to go, if they've been bought by the blood of Jesus, they have the Holy Spirit of God. Think urgency now. They're not the future of the church. They are the church right now.
That's good.
So how do we mobilize them? Not just to only serve their children's ministry, not just to serve their student ministry, but serve the church as a whole. Because I think we always like, okay, what's the sticking power? How do we make sure children that graduate out of the children ministry actually go into student ministry? How do we make sure this, kiddos that graduate out of student ministry don't drop out and stick in the church? And one of the greatest sticking powers is when they have involvement in the church as a whole, when there's relationships in the church as a whole. They're serving already. Some of my favorite churches to preach in is when you go up on a Sunday morning, you're walking in and there's the 8-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 40-year-old, the 80-year-old all serving together. They're all greeting together, handing out bulletins together, taking up offering together, serving together. And so, hey, those young people, mobilize them to be the church right now and let them serve, not just in children's ministry or student ministry, let them serve the church as a whole and get them involved now.
I love that. Well, one of the coolest things I've seen with this book so far is in my community, at my church, without my involvement at all, I promise, our student minister got this book, bought a case of it to take to the principal and to the coaches in our community because of just how much this research gave them insight into this generation. And I hope if you're listening to this, you'll be compelled to learn alongside so that the conversation can continue. How can we reach Gen Alpha and how can we reach the world until Jesus comes once again? Thank you guys for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.